Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I look forward to being together here on Shabbat. We had a wonderful week here at B'nai Torah, and part of what made it really great was that we were able to reflect on the year gone by and some of the wonderful accomplishments of this synagogue and the growth of our community. And I don't mean just in numbers, but I also mean in terms of spirit and in terms of strength. And so it was really a nice moment for us to be together and to give each other the appropriate thanks. My message today is not necessarily an upbeat message, but I think it's a really important message. And it comes from the Parsha that we will be reading, Parshat Emor. And it's a Parsha that we studied this morning in my class. It also comes from the fact that the proceedings for the trial against the man who committed the horrific murders at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh are finally beginning. Earlier this week, the Rebbitzin of the Orthodox Synagogue, which met on the ground floor of that synagogue, and from whose congregation 3 people were killed, wrote a piece in the New York Times in which she spoke about the opposition to capital punishment in the Jewish tradition. And there clearly is a strain of that. One of the attorneys, E.J. Leeserman, who's in our class, indicated to the class that from his experience as a lawyer, attorneys don't want Jews to sit in on capital cases because they are generally opposed to capital punishment. That may be changing in the Jewish world now, but it certainly was a hallmark of our people for a long time. In the Parsha, we read a couple things which are quite interesting. One has to do with the Kohen and the behaviors of the ancient priest and how he was to be kept separate from all forms of death. And the reason is that was to be the central place of the Jewish world, emanating the most important Jewish values. And central to the most important Jewish values was always the affirmation of life. So the priest represented everything that had to do with life. But also in the Parsha, there's the law that's known in Latin as ex talionis, or in the legal system, and that means, it's noted by the famous an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. So we find rooted in the Bible, there is reason given for capital punishment, and yet by the time of the rabbis and through the rabbinic period, we see a rejection of capital punishment in our Jewish tradition. That was really turned on its head in the 1960s when the infamous Adolf Eichmann was brought to trial, and he was convicted of a crime against humanity, which became the only crime in Israel where somebody could be put to death. And he is the only person that's ever been put to death by the Israeli legal system. We know it evokes a lot of feelings when one has very personal context to murder. There is a sense that only the death penalty can make up for what was lost, but really nothing makes up for what is lost. We know it's driven up by revenge, it's driven by a sense of justice, and yet we wonder, where can justice ultimately be found for those who are killed will never ever be brought back to us. It's an important conversation taking place in our country and has been for quite a while. Some people, many, many of us are so deeply disturbed by the numbers of people that are on death row or have been on death row. And in fact, evidence has shown that they didn't commit the murder, and yet they were put to death for murders that they were actually innocent of. So it's a very important societal issue to be discussed. One of the beauties of being part of our tradition is that we don't shy away from any of these difficult questions. But not only that, we know there aren't simple answers to these questions either. And so we learn about them. We talk about precedent, we talk about history, and we talk about our lives today and the conditions of our lives today. I look forward to those conversations continuing as they did in the class this morning, and will always continue amongst our people who are very interested in learning greater truths and learning more about themselves and about the world that we live in, and how do we make this world better. For now, I would say that it's the most important thing to draw out of this as a rabbi and a teacher is that we have to affirm life. And we have to continue to teach our children just how valuable life, all forms of life, are. We have to live in a world where to say l'chaim really means something important. It's not just an expression of joy, it's an essential expression of Jewish values. Shabbat Shalom.